An exclusive update for you today on this case here because many people have asked for it. This was my pro bono case that I took on just over a month ago now. If you are not familiar with this case, I will link it below and you can go and watch it to get the full context. But in short, this was where the police turned up at a house to speak with the mother's daughter and to seize her phone. The mother believed that this was all over viewing a social media post. There is much more to it, much of which remains disputed, which I can't go into for obvious reasons. But the police did put out a disinformation press update to correct the position, which I felt went far too far. I made various criticisms in my video, both of the press update and of the fact that the police did go into the property and seized the phone. Mostly because they didn't arrest the girl and I challenged the powers on which they purported to rely to enter the property and seize the phone. I since put all of that in a very detailed letter of complaint to the police, which I'm yet to receive a comprehensive response to. Just to be clear, I'm not inviting those who represent the police to come back and make any kind of public response to this. This is me updating you as to what's happening. I would not embarrass the firm by asking them to agree, disagree, or to even respond to what I'm doing. What they have said is that they will take another 3 months to come back to me with a full response to my letter. That, however, is not the primary update for this video. There's a primary update and a little bit of a warning too in the second half of the video. I'll show you some snippets of the letter that I sent of complaint, complaining about the use of police powers here, what they said initially, and so on. The police have been very helpful to me, to be perfectly honest, so I'm thankful to the police for doing that. What I can say is that this hasn't been without its difficulties. So first of all, if you appreciate my channel here in helping you to bring these updates to you within the confines that I can professionally and what I can and cannot say, obviously being professionally engaged on the case, please do subscribe to the channel. I am soaring to 1 million subscribers thanks to all of you. I really do appreciate all of your comments of support and thanks, etc. I really feel that it does help a lot of people and that is my goal here. I am so grateful that it does help people to understand. And I'd be very grateful if you do subscribe. I've also contacted YouTube about people being unsubscribed without any action on your part, which I think is hugely frustrating, both for me and for you. So hopefully they will resolve that. So with that out of the way, let's get into the update here. So the phone has been returned. It's taken over a month for it to be returned, and it was lost in the meantime. They believe, the mother believes that this has been damaged more than it was before. It was already damaged, but they believe that it's more damaged than it was before. I'm yet to raise this with the police. But it did get lost in the interim, and there was lots of phone calls, and it appears that it wasn't properly tracked, and they didn't quite know where it was. And so half of that time was finding it so that it could be returned back to the family. Now, one thing that I find really concerning is that I am told that there was no paperwork when they took the phone in the first place. There was no receipt when it was collected, just that it had to be signed for to say that it had been collected from the police station. The police at the police station were very friendly, very nice, and everybody has been trying to be helpful throughout this process. So this is not a slam the police video in any sense. But one thing that it does highlight is that this was just one phone and it took over a month to come back. The background details of which I'm not going to comment on for obvious reasons, but it took over a month to come back, and much of that time was because it had been lost, misplaced, and causing frustration and annoyance for the police involved trying to get this phone returned when they didn't know where it was. Now, if this wasn't a phone and this was something else, some other kind of property in detention, and it had been lost and misplaced, what then does that say about the rest of the system? As I say, I don't want to overly criticize the police here, but this is just one example of an item that belongs to somebody, which I have suggested to the police should not have been taken in the first place. And bearing in mind, this is somebody's private property. A phone is an intimately private thing because it's got a lot of your details and information on it. So for it to get lost is pretty poor, considering that I say and I maintain that they should not have taken it in the first place. So as I said, I'm going to show you some snippets of my letter to them in just a moment of why I challenge the powers they purport to have relied upon to enter the property and seize the phone, so that you can better understand it and better understand, generally you understand, your position with regard to the police, entry to your property, seizure of your property, and a big stock warning to you that can apply to everybody, which I really wish wasn't necessary to make. But it would seem that some officers, with great respect, it would seem that some officers don't fully understand their powers, how they're supposed to be used, and then if they are not used properly, they are open to be sued and liable to damages, which is what I claim in the letter. So I'll be back with that in just a moment, but if you do like to support me and my channel, I would like you to bear with me for 2 minutes while I talk to you about a company that supports my channel here to help you get both sides of a picture. Because much of the news that you read has a political leaning to it. I wish it didn't, but it really does. It's either left-leaning, right-leaning, or some of them, and sometimes they report it more neutrally, right in the center. I use ground news to help me to understand this because, as you see on the right-hand side there is a bias distribution which tells you on a particular story whether it leans left, right, or whether it's neutrally reported. Ground news provides a bias comparison you can see in the middle here, which gives you, in a nutshell, what the left is saying, what the right is saying. So for this story, the Home Office squandered billions on asylum hotels. The left-leaning outlets frame this as a failed asylum accommodation due to conservative mismanagement, highlighting vulnerable people and huge profits by firms. The right-leaning, however, blame the Home Office. They say bungling Home Office actions are catastrophic mismanagement, emphasising the billions of pounds wasted. And you can see this play out in the headlines here. From The Independent, Home Office has a chance to end the failed asylum accommodation system. And Byline Times, the sheer scale of conservative mismanagement of the asylum system revealed. And looking at the right-leaning headlines from LBC, Home Office squandered billions on migrant hotels. And from The Sun, billions wasted on migrant hotels as bungling Home Office sparks chaos. And of course, as a partner to my channel, you get a great discount, which is 40% off, 40% off, using my code BBB, so ground.news/BBB. I'll link it below. It'll help you get both sides of the picture so you know if you're being swayed and manipulated. So do check out Ground News. It really helps in my research, and I think it's fantastic. So as promised, back to some snippets of my letter of complaint to the police and a broad warning and some guidance for you about if ever or whenever the police turn up at your door and ask to come in for a bit of a chat. Because sadly, I think gone are the days when we should be comfortable just saying, come on in, officer, sit down, have a cup of tea, and let's have a chat. I think that we are at a time where, with the police coming out, and this is not a direct criticism of West Midlands police, just generally across the country, we are at a point where police are turning up and they are questioning you for all sorts of different things, when I believe they are stretching their investigatory powers further than they really need to for many different kinds of offences. And I'm talking generally across the board, with those that we've seen questioned for social media posts and things they've written on Facebook and all sorts of different things. Complaints by their employer, complaints by their neighbours, and so on. So let's get into some snippets of my letter, which really it is putting pen to paper about the complaints that I raised in even before I took this case on pro bono to assist her. So with this letter being sent out on the 26th of September, it is a full month to date before this phone was returned. Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you the full letter. I can't do that. But what I can do is show you bits of it where I've put pen to paper to put into writing the complaints that I raised about the purported use of powers in my previous videos. So as I expected, we were told that the police purport to have relied upon powers under Section 17 of PACE to enter the property. I didn't accept that, which I'll explain in a minute, but Section 17 of PACE, among other things, does allow entry to a property to effect arrest for a warrant or, for example, arresting a person for an indictable offence. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, that is not just things really serious, such as murder, manslaughter, and so on. It can include various malicious communications offences, which are an either-way offence, which makes it an indictable offence. This is something that is often misunderstood, because if an offence can be tried in the Crown Court, it is, even if it's an either-way offence, it is an indictable offence, not to be confused with indictable only. So accordingly, I said I do not accept that the officer's entry was justified under Section 17 of PACE. I consider that the officers are liable in trespass, conversion, and assault or battery, described below with supporting authorities of the High Court and Court of Appeal. Section 17 permits entry, among other things, for the purposes of effecting an arrest. It does not permit entry merely to investigate or to accompany a person to retrieve property. The officer's body-worn footage makes the officer's stated objective unequivocally clear, which, as I'm explaining, is to retrieve the phone. And an interesting point is that even the police press update made that clear as well. The police press update said that they wanted to speak with her and to retrieve the phone, which is not what Section 17 is for. And this is illustrated with a portion of the transcript where the mother reluctantly said, "Just grab that phone, just get the phone." One of the officers said, "One of us needs to go with her in order to get the phone." Mother said, "Absolutely not." Officer said, "Unfortunately, we do." Mother said, "No." One of the officers said, "That's what needs to happen to prevent the destruction of evidence. That's what needs to happen. I'm sorry." Mother said, "No, you're not allowed in here." And then one of the officers shouts in her face her name. And so I suggest that the officers couldn't have been clearer. Their stated purpose was to accompany the child to retrieve the phone, not to effect an arrest. As you acknowledge, the arrest was regarded as a last resort. No arrest was made before, during, or after the entry. The press update expressly confirms the same, and this is a caption from that press update. It says, "We spoke to the girl's mother at her home and explained that we needed to speak to her daughter and recover her mobile phone as part of the investigation." And so accordingly, I said, on any objective assessment, Section 17 does not bite. This conclusion is supported by authority, where the Court of Appeal rejected the suggestion that the desire to speak to somebody can be elided into a power of arrest. The distinction between investigation and arrest is material. I say the officers stated a purpose for entry other than arrest, and thus gave them no right in law to enter, rendering them trespassers. And in another case, the court made it clear that an officer exercising Section 17 powers must give the true reason for entry where the occupiers are present. Otherwise, again, renders the entry unlawful. And again, the officer stated the reason affirmed in the press update that it was plainly to obtain the phone, not to make an arrest. And then I go on to explain that if the entry was unlawful, then it follows that the seizure of the phone under Section 19 of PACE was unlawful. Thus, it also follows if they were trespassers there that there is a potential claim in conversion of property, which is where you treat property as though you are the owner when you have no authority to do so. And if the seizure turns out to be unlawful, then they had no authority to do that, which could make that conversion. And likewise, by physically pushing past somebody, could make that assault and battery, at least in the technical sense. And there is a case I referred to that supports this as well, which is Friswell and Chief Constable of Essex Police in 2004, where the court held that the police officer was liable for damages in trespass and assault due to unlawful entry on the claimant's premises. Here, the officers lacked lawful authority as they entered without a warrant, consent, or justification under powers such as Section 17. The court found that his actions constituted trespass to land and, in the course of his conduct, an assault, because he wasn't supposed to be there. It resulted in an award of damages to the claimant for violation of their property and personal rights. So if all of this transpires to be an unlawful entry, then we could be looking at conversion of property and potentially assault and battery, all of which complaints have been set out in this letter. Now, as I said, I am not publicly inviting the police or their lawyers to respond to any of this. That would be improper, and in fact, I'm not allowed to do that. That's not the purpose of this video. It's really just to help you to understand how these things progress. Now, because there is no separate and dedicated pre-action protocol, that is the steps that you should follow when you have a complaint against somebody and how they should respond to you. There's no separate set of rules for complaints made to the police. So they are now going to take several months to consider this letter and come back to me with a formal response. But more generally, I think I am very sad to say that we're at a point now where if some officers misunderstand their powers and they misunderstand how they're supposed to be used, when they can and cannot seize property and so on, we are at a point where I would generally not recommend inviting the officers into your home just for a sit-down chat, as we probably would have been very happy to do so many years ago. And the very simple reason is this, because under Section 19 of PACE, police can seize any property if they are lawfully on the premises. That doesn't include if you are behind the threshold of your front door and the officer is on your driveway. Now, they have an implied right of access up to your front door, but unless they can justify forcing entry under Section 17 to make an arrest, and then of course seize any property in accordance with that. They've got the authority to use force under section 117 of PACE to enter the property under section 17 of PACE, and then of course they can seize any property that they need to. And there are other general powers of seizure as well. But my point here is this: if they don't yet have enough evidence, rhyme or reason to forcibly enter your property to make an arrest and seize property, and they just want to come in for a chat because they want to seize the property so that they can further investigate, then I would be reluctant to let them in. And I'm very sad to have to say that, because I would like to think that if they say that it's just for a chat, that it really is just for a chat and that there isn't any other kind of trickery going on. Now, if it were outright trickery and it was a chat, and then as soon as they got inside, they quickly seized the phone, that in itself could be challenged, because of course we can't have the police being dishonest about their purposes for entering the premises by invitation. Remembering, of course, that you can rescind, this is one question that people have asked me, you can rescind permission to be inside your property at any stage. So if they are inside the property and you feel that you've changed your mind, you can ask them to leave, at which point they become a trespasser if they remain on the premises. Unless, of course, they then exercise the power under section 17 or otherwise generally to arrest you and seize property. So I do hope that sharing bits of this case with you that I can share with you within my professional limitations helps you to understand the process, the risks and the dangers, and of course the law that underpins what happens if you feel aggrieved as to what's happened. Because if you felt that you had somehow been tricked by an officer coming into your house, and I know this is the case because some people have written to me before and said an officer has come in to have a chat and then seized a whole load of stuff that's in the house. If you feel aggrieved by that and you feel you were tricked somehow into the officers entering, there may be a separate complaint there. Obviously, every case turns on its own facts. And obviously, I understand that I haven't disclosed a great deal to you in this video other than what I've already explained in previous videos, but I thought it's useful for you to see the behind the scenes, how these things are put into a form of words when writing to the police, complaining to the police. And I must say the police have been very helpful, polite and respectful with me in the communication, but these things do take time. And whilst a month to get this phone back is a long time, I am frankly surprised that it's not a lot longer than that, because I hear stories of these things either never coming back to you or taking a very long time to come back to you. So I will keep you updated within the professional bounds that I can do so. Please do subscribe to the channel, and I apologize to you that have been unsubscribed without you knowing it. That is frustrating, I understand. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.